Oh, hello. Happy Feed Your Head Friday the 13th, friends. Welcome to our killer campout. In honor of Vorhees Day, we're coming out of the cabin to bring you a tale of true crime. Though the Jason films may not have been inspired by real-life events, there does exist an eerily similar camping catastrophe. While the case remains unsolved, we're examining all the evidence, diving into the grisly details, and lining up possible suspects on one of Finland's greatest mysteries. Think you can crack the case? I'm DreyOfTheDead, and it's time to feed your head. On June 4th of 1960, 4 teenagers from Vantaa, Finland decided to get away for the weekend. 15-year-olds Myuu Björklund and Anja Mäki held on tight as their boyfriends, 18-year-old Nils Gustafsson and Seppo Boisman, steered their motorcycles towards the woods of Espoo. Once there, they made their way to Lake Bodom and spent their afternoon fishing and swimming. As evening approached, the couples set up a single tent and the boys threw back a few beers. Myuu's journal sets the scene. 5th day camping at Lake Bodom, Seppi and Nisi were drunk. Up at 2 a.m., Seppi was fishing. Though the sun hardly sets in Finland, it rose at 3 a.m. What occurred from that point on remains a mystery. But here is what we know. At 11 a.m., carpenter Esko Johansson and his son decided to take a dip in the lake when they noticed a collapsed tent on the peninsula. Curious, they moved in for a closer look. And that's when they noticed the bodies. In a panic, the two hurried off to call police. During this time, a man named Sigurd Velasma also came upon the scene and ran to make the same call. Authorities arrived at noon, and what they found was horrifying. Myuu lay on top of the tent, naked from the waist down. Nils next to her, his shoes missing. Inside the tent, the bodies of Anja and Seppo. Both showed signs of broken jaws and head trauma. Seppo's neck and chest revealed stab wounds. Myuu had suffered the worst of the injuries. Along with defensive wounds on her arms, she had been stabbed 15 times in her face and neck, many of those after death. Miraculously, Nils was still alive, even after a broken jaw, blood-force trauma to the face, and a gash in his cheek so deep his teeth were visible through the wound. He'd also suffered a blow to the back of the head and was leaking cerebral fluid from his nose. Doctors reported that had he not been found, he would have soon succumbed to his injuries. The slashes in the fabric revealed that the killer never entered the tent, but rather cut the cords holding it up, allowing it to collapse, and then attacked from the outside. The teens' possessions were scattered around the campsite, though many key items were missing. Both of the boys' shoes, wallets, watches, cigarettes, the keys to their motorcycles, and Seppo's knife. Strangely enough, their motorcycles remained, though the weapons used were never found. Any evidence beyond the obvious was considered lost due to the investigative failures of police. Not only did they neglect to take official recordings of their findings, but they also failed to cordon off the area, leaving it open to contamination. They also enlisted the help of soldiers to find the missing items, who further trampled the area and came back empty-handed. Once they left, curious onlookers and careless campers all but destroyed the scene. Even the blanket that lined the ground and one of the boys' leather jackets were returned to relatives and ultimately destroyed. One key piece of evidence was found next to the tent: a rolled pillowcase tied with an elastic band. Blood and semen were found on the fabric, though the semen did not match that of either boy. Following the investigation, over 4,000 witnesses were interviewed, with a few citing some very interesting details. Of the numerous witness accounts, only 3 provided insightful information. A woman living on the west bank of the lake reported seeing 2 men fishing around 4 a.m., but was unsure if they were Nils and Seppo. Just 2 hours later, 2 boys who were birdwatching heard loud voices that may have been cries for help. When they ventured near the campsite at 6 a.m., they noticed a blond man walking away from the collapsed tent. Another man, Olavi, was fishing west of the campsite and never heard the cries, but he did see the same blond man walking south from the crime scene and was able to provide a brief description. He was about 20 to 30 years old, 5'8" with a regular build, light hair, dark pants, and a light shirt or jacket. Unfortunately, this was an all too common description of men across Scandinavian countries, so the lead was rather useless. As a result of damage to his brain, Nils suffered from amnesia after the incident, but was able to provide some basic details under hypnosis. In a trance state, he described waking up to the tent falling on top of him. As it was slashed, he caught a look at the attacker. His description matched that of Olavi's, and the similarity between their police sketches was quite striking. Doctors were skeptical of this testimony, claiming that memories lost to post-traumatic amnesia could not be recalled under hypnosis. In his normal state, what Nils could recall of the perp was something else entirely: a black figure with red eyes, prompting many to believe that death itself had come for the teens. As word spread of the case, locals to the Lake Bodom area had one name in mind: that of local kiosk owner Carl Gyllstrom. It was clear to residents that the teens were not locals. If they had been, they would have never risked setting up camp in the area. You see, Carl considered himself the caretaker of Lake Bodom and had a disdain for visitors, especially children and noisy mopeds. Most described him as a hostile man who abused his wife and kids. He was known for putting razor blades in apples to prevent stealing, throwing rocks at cyclists, and even shooting at cars. He was also known for cutting tent ropes. Some in the area even claimed to see Carl leaving the scene that night, but were too afraid to notify police. When it was discovered that Carl had filled in a well on his property just days after the incident, police gave him a visit, but his wife claimed he was in bed with her the night of the murders. According to neighbors, Carl made several confessions to the murders, both drunkenly and sober. Police simply considered the man disturbed, and because he had an alibi, decided to ignore him. In 1969, Carl drowned in his beloved lake, likely by suicide. On her deathbed, his wife recanted her alibi, admitting that Carl threatened to kill her if she told police he wasn't home. Professor Jorma Palo introduced another possibility in his 2003 book, Bodom's Riddle. He recounted meeting the unfortunately named Hans Assmann on June 6th during his shift at Helsinki's surgical hospital. The German man arrived at the emergency room disheveled, with dirty hands and blood on his clothes, The blood was not his, and it was unclear why he was asking for treatment. He appeared nervous and at one point seemed to fake unconsciousness. Paulo contacted police, who questioned Hans briefly, but after hearing his alibi, were ultimately not interested. They neglected to even take the bloodstained clothing that Paulo was sure they'd want to keep for evidence. As it turns out, Hans had a very sordid past. He was a former Nazi in World War II, and his sister even provided evidence of a pension he'd received from the German Air Force. Captured by Russia, he remained a prisoner of war from 1943 to 1945, prompting rumors of his status as a KGB agent. After his release, he returned to Germany and married Finnish woman Vienno, who was also rumored to be a spy, as she was known by various names in different countries. In 1961, Hans was arrested for beating Vienno in front of witnesses, even kicking her while she was on the ground. He was found guilty of assault, and the couple eventually divorced in the 70s. Vienno later claimed that Hans was involved in multiple campsite murders in the area. Hans lived just 3 miles from Lake Bodom, had a striking resemblance to the police sketch, and cut his hair shortly after its release. On his deathbed in 1997, a journalist writing a book about his life asked him about the case. His reply? "I suppose you expect me to tell you about those tent and knife things. I have to disappoint you. I will not speak about the details. I will not admit nor deny things." Hans remained the public's favorite suspect until 44 years later, when investigators decided to reopen the case. Advanced technology had uncovered new blood evidence, leading to the arrest of perhaps the most surprising suspect of all, Nils Gustafsson. In March of 2004, the Finnish Bureau of Investigations announced they'd performed a blood spatter analysis on the tent and shoes collected, after which the sole survivor of the Lake Bodom murders was arrested. Police claimed they'd suspected him all along. The KRP relied on the testimony of a new witness, who claimed the boys had visited her and her friend's tent late that night. They were drunk, she alleged, and Nils had tried to fight Seppo. Prosecutors used this information to spin another possible series of events. Myuu had rejected the advances of a drunken Nils earlier that night, and he was exiled from the tent. When Seppo tried to talk to him, a fight ensued, which Seppo won, resulting in Nils' fractured jaw and broken facial bones. Nils later returned to the tent and, in the early morning hours, killed all of his friends, focusing the worst of it on Myuu. They claimed that he then inflicted superficial stab wounds on himself, tried to hide his shoes, and staged the rest of the crime. This, they said, was the reason his shoes contained the other victim's blood, but not his own. They even had the bird-watching boys identify Nils as the person they saw walking away from the scene. But clearly, there were issues with this story. For starters, Olavi, who also saw the blonde man, disagreed that it was Nils. Nils was found in his socks, and there was no evidence of him walking half a mile back to the tent after hiding his shoes. Sure, the superficial wounds were easy to manufacture, but what about the hole in his cheek or the cerebral fluid leaking from his brain? Each victim suffered the same broken jaw, suggesting that a similar technique was used to injure all of them. The blood found on the tent was from all 4 victims, and why would a witness wait 44 years to come forward? The pillowcase found contained semen that didn't belong to either boy, suggesting the presence of an outside attacker. The defense argued that Nils would have been incapable of murdering 3 people with the extent of his injuries from this supposed fight. A full year after being arrested, Nils was acquitted due to inconclusive evidence and no real motive. He was paid 45,000 euros for mental anguish, but barred from suing Finnish newspapers for defamation. Despite his acquittal, many people still consider Nils a prime suspect. To this day, no further evidence has been found, and no new suspects have been named. What truly happened that night remains a dark and tragic mystery that still haunts the woods of Finland. If you enjoyed this strange but true tale, be sure to subscribe and check out previous episodes covering everything from unspeakable family secrets to furniture flipping poltergeists. I put out new videos every other Friday. If you're a fan of blooper reels and behind the scenes footage, consider joining my Patreon. This is just one of the patrons who make these videos possible. If you haven't done so yet, don't forget to follow me on Instagram. I may have a giveaway coming up. Can you believe that this is our 10th episode? Holy guacamole! You guys don't know how much I appreciate all the love and support that you've shown me thus far, and I would not be able to do this without you. Thank you guys so much for being here and believing in this series. As always, friends, be well and stay strange.